Get in on the action and make your bet with Sports Interaction. The F1 schedule is heating up. Will you go with the reliable and Max Verstappen, or take your chance with a potential surprise? Download the app in Ontario. Use the QR code you see at the bottom of your screen somewhere, or head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN to get started. 19 plus, please play responsibly. Welcome to Nailing the Apex, everyone. I'm Tim Hauraney. Please head on over to Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with Apple Podcasts as well. Rate a review. Really helps us grow the show. You can follow me on social media. Joining me today, we have a 3-person pods. First time we've actually done this on the show. We'll start with Megan Schuster from The Ringer. Megan, how are you?
I'm great, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming. How was Europe? We didn't really get to talk about it when we before we came on to record here.
Europe was wonderful. I had a great time. I was in Stockholm, Paris, and Amsterdam. And if you've never been to Stockholm or hadn't considered it, I would put it on your radar. It was very pleasantly surprising.
What was Amsterdam like? Because I always wanted to go. I've always wanted to go there. I was trying to plan a trip where I went and covered the Dutch Grand Prix and then spent more time there this year, but I didn't end up making that one happen. Instead, I'm going to the British Grand Prix. But like, what was Amsterdam like?
Amsterdam was great, extremely walkable. Cool. We did a canal tour, the Van Gogh Museum, which I would highly recommend. I actually saw a couple of Max Verstappen hats in the wild, which I was really not expecting to see. So that was a little bit shocking and pleasantly surprising. But no, I would recommend it. Very walkable city.
And also joining us today from FanGraphs, it's Michael Baumann. Baumann, what's changed from 7 days ago?
I went to Woodbury, New Jersey yesterday and got a tattoo. So, it's not you simply must go to Europe. I'm not on the grand tour like Meg is, but we're having some fun in the Pine Barrens down here.
So what did I saw on Instagram? Your tattoo was a seal getting out of water. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So you gotta take me back.
It's a long story. You can cut this out if it takes too long. But basically, during the pandemic, my friends and I every Friday we would have a Zoom bracket night where we would pick a topic and argue about it. And so one of the topics early on was what's the best kind of mammal? And I made the bracket, and I'm a big fan of seals. And so I put seals and sea lions number 1 overall. And my wife found out she realized that I had done this about halfway through the argument and ridiculed me in front of all my friends. And it became an inside joke. So we've all, as we're coming out of the pandemic, a bunch of us are getting tattoos based on those arguments. So this one is mine.
I like it. Let's talk about Formula One, Spanish Grand Prix coming up this weekend. F1 Classic, obviously, with the racetrack at Circuit de Catalunya in Spain. I mean, especially now they've opened up the last 2 corners again, and we can touch on this later, but I'm just so excited for that. Sergio Perez, really rough Monaco Grand Prix. Let's talk about him. We didn't get to talk about him much on Sunday on the last episode of Nailing the Apex, but this is a big weekend for him, I feel. Judging by how badly things went in Monaco, and like one Michael Scott would say, it's over. We're screwed. Is it over for Sergio Perez? Megan?
Yeah. I thought it was over after Miami, if I'm being totally candid with you both. Oh. I really thought he had to pull off something there to give himself some sense of hope, because most of his results and wins had been all of his wins had been on street tracks. And, there was such a cluster of them at the beginning of the season that we aren't going to get that the rest of the year. And Max has kind of boat raced him on those more classic tracks. So, yeah, I thought it was over. I especially think it's over after this. I hope he can now kind of settle into a role where he's not trying quite so hard. I felt like that was where he went wrong a lot in Monaco, was just really trying to push it all the way to the edge to get on pole, which I think he knew he had to do. Crashed, of course, saw his car fly through the air, which is another thing I would like to talk about, how Mercedes is very intently studying the Red Bull floor these days. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was over. I especially think it's over now. And I kind of hope he can just settle into a role where, if Max has some sort of mechanical issue or a failure, that he can step in and get a few wins. But yeah, I don't think it's close anymore.
Baumann.
Yeah, I think that my stance on Checo versus Max in a intra-team title fight all along has been that Checo can beat Max when he's getting everything right and circumstances play into his favor. And I just didn't see that happening 12 times in 22 races, particularly because when Max has a bad weekend, he finishes second or third. I think he had this incredible streak from, I think it was 2020 through maybe Monaco of last year. When he had a healthy car, he finished on the podium every race. And when Checo has a bad weekend, he finishes fifth in Australia. He finishes, in among the back markers in Monaco. And Meg is exactly right that I think he's not just a street circuit specialist. Like, he's one of those drivers who's good in changeable conditions as well. This would have been an ideal race for him if he hadn't binned it in, not even in qualifying, in Q1, and just couldn't, like, the difference between a very good Grand Prix driver, like Sergio Perez, and one of the all-time greats like Max Verstappen is the ability to get something out of situations like, when you fall into a situation like that to eke out even points, I think would have been a tall order here. So this is just, he can't ever have a weekend like this if he's going to challenge Max. And now he's had, I think, Meg, you're right, Miami's a missed opportunity. If he had won in Miami, won in Monaco, like, we could talk about the street track. Singapore is coming down the line, but, maybe tracks, conventional circuits with some unusual characteristics like Canada, like Hungary, he could have given Max a run for his money, but I think it's just time to give up the pretext now.
I mean, I agree with both of you. I think it's going to be tough for him moving forward for sure. I mean, coming into Miami, I thought that, honestly, I thought that he was going to be able to at least put up a fight, but when you're going up against Max Verstappen, the guy's at the peak of his powers right now. He's performing so well that it was going to be tough. You'd have to be consistent and limit the mistakes. I mean, obviously you have a huge mistake from him in Monaco, but I also think Miami was good. Well, it's not good to see. Wouldn't be good to see for Sergio, but for me, it was interesting to see how, Max dealt with the tires and the tire situation. Sergio has always been really good with tire management, and we've got a new compound for this year, and I think at the beginning of the season, I think Sergio had a bit of an upper hand in that department, and I think as we got into Miami, that's when Max got on top of that. And I think Miami was an example of how Max had figured out the tire, especially in race conditions, because they were both on the different strategy, and Max was able to just make all of that work. Plus, he was in a load of traffic as well for that first stint of his, and I just think he did a better job with the tire, and I think he's just on top of it, and I honestly don't think Max can be beaten, and which brings up the question, can Red Bull win every single race this season?
I brought this up 1 week ago, and you scoffed.
I did, and I still am going to. Actually, go for it, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong.
So this, I don't know that I'd bet on it. If you'd have to, I think I'd have to get favorable odds to bet on Red Bull running the table, just because 22 races is just a huge number of weekends to string together where at least one of the cars is at or near the front of the grid. I think what we saw, that incredible battle for pole and qualifying in Monaco, showed that the gap was, just like you said, lower here from Red Bull to Aston Martin, Ferrari, Alpine, Mercedes than it would be at other tracks. And now that this opportunity's come and gone for Charles Leclerc or Fernando Alonso or whoever else to steal a win, we're sort of looking for that next ideal condition or that next ideal situation. I think at this point it's going to take a crash or a breakdown, or because particularly what we've seen Max Verstappen do a couple times this year already is something goes wrong in qualifying and he's still able to fight back for first or second because that Red Bull is so good in traffic. And that, you think back to the last dominant car, the Mercedes of the mid to late 2010s, that car's that car was so aerosensitive, that it was so good in qualifying and so good at the front of the pack that even Lewis Hamilton sometimes struggled to get it through traffic in a way that, Verstappen and this Red Bull are not. And so that's just another weakness it's another space where a front runner would ordinarily have a weakness where there just isn't one now. And nothing about the way that most of the competitors, maybe Aston Martin being the only exception, but nothing about Ferrari or Mercedes or Alpine in the direction that they're going really gives me a whole lot of confidence that they're going to close that gap on pace. And so unless Red Bull is so far ahead that they check out of developing this car completely, and we get a fluke result in Brazil or Mexico or some other track like that, that I just don't know where that win is going to come from. It's probably a better than even money bet that it will come somewhere. Like even the dominant Michael Schumacher Ferrari teams never ran the table. McLaren with Senna and Prost never ran the table. So it'll happen somewhere, I guess. But Red Bull have to be heavy favorites in every race from here to the end of the season. They've just done it on so many different types of tracks now.
Yeah, I think they can win every race. I would agree with you, Baumann, that I don't think that they will. There's got to be some outing where, Max has an issue and has to retire the car and Checo gets into a battle with Fernando, or maybe they both retire the car. Who knows? Like you said, there are so many more races to come. But I think that question is so interesting, too, because I agree with you, Baumann, that this car really allows Max to be patient, where in the past, I think we saw him make mistakes when he was overly aggressive, going up against Lewis, and when maybe he didn't have this full-fledged faith in the machinery. But he is able to take his time on those early laps. Even when he's in traffic, he's able to really kind of sit back and let the race come to him and make the overtakes where he wants to and where it's convenient for him, because they have that DRS pace and because he has just full confidence that the car is going to be there. So I don't see him, crashing out and doing anything embarrassing like he maybe would have done in past years. I think he is just able to kind of pick things apart however he wants. And with that pace, he's always going to get back to the front.
Yeah, I don't think Red Bull's going to be winning all the races this season, only because of a few things. Actually, Megan, you alluded to this a little earlier with the floor of the Red Bull, obviously, with Sergio Perez's crash in Monaco. We were able to get a good look at that thing, and I believe it was Ted Kravitz who had said that Mercedes' upgraded floor and side pods were prehistoric compared to the Red Bulls, if I'm not mistaken. I think having that exposed is going to change some things with how the development race is going to take place. I mean, Sergio did say today that the team probably won't be bringing any more big upgrades to the car for the rest of the season. They do have a new floor that will be debuted this weekend, but aside from that, he wasn't very confident in saying there wasn't going to be anything really big coming down the pipeline, where we still have got huge upgrades that are coming for a lot of the other teams. And I honestly still believe, because we saw it last season, that teams can claw back big amounts of performance with this regulation. Now, is it going to be performance that's going to be on the same level as Red Bull? I doubt it. But I also think there's going to be tracks where Red Bull's going to struggle a little bit, and then there's going to be a team like Aston Martin, Ferrari, or even Mercedes, who are going to hit on something one weekend, and then we're going to see an actual battle for podium positions and maybe the lead of the race. But again, there's still a lot of racing to go, like you guys have already said. But it's interesting to see with what Mercedes brought last weekend, and then this weekend Ferrari has a massive upgrade that they've brought. Do you guys think that Aston Martin could fall off their current pace and maybe even drop out of second place in the constructor standings?
I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't fallen off pace to this point. Not because I think that even, Mercedes and Ferrari are making that many leaps and bounds to get closer to them. It's more that I just sort of expected all of their development to have come in the beginning and for them to slowly fall away. And I don't know if it's just like Fernando driving like his head's been cut off or what is exactly happening there, but they have really kind of surprised me with their ability to maintain across the races. And, seeing him with his foot up on Max's podium last weekend was very, very fun and very cheeky. And he posted it to his Instagram as well and kind of like nudged and pointed at his foot like he knew what he was doing and this was not a mistake. So I think he has full confidence that they'll continue to be up there. And I kind of hope that's the case. I think it would be extremely fun if they are able to maintain this across the rest of the season.
Yeah, Baumann, they're separated by, Mercedes is 1 point behind in third place behind Aston Martin.
Yeah, I think that speaks to two things. One, George Russell being better than Lance Stroll, as much as I would love to get on the future world champion bandwagon with him. And I do think some of the mockery of Lance Stroll is overblown. I think he is a cut above some of the other, quote unquote pay drivers in F1 over the past few years. But so there's that, and also Mercedes just tends to be a very clean race operation in a way that definitely Ferrari is not. Alpine has struggled, and Aston Martin, to a certain extent as well. So they're just not making as many mistakes. And this is how they challenged Ferrari last year. And so I don't know, but it all just comes back down to pace against the Red Bull, and like the Aston Martin having more developmental time, more wind tunnel time, more CFD runs, I think is one area where I would say, that gives me a little bit of confidence that they will continue to make gains against the rest of the field, and particularly Red Bull, just based on them finishing farther back in the Constructors' Championship last year. But, who knows? So, yeah, I think that I don't really think it's Fernando Alonso flattering the car the way Lando Norris has in McLaren or Charles Leclerc has at Ferrari over the past couple of years. I don't think he's really overdriving it to beyond what it's capable of. I think he's just getting the best out of the second best car on the grid, and he's finishing third most of the time.
I think there's going to be two things that put them out of second in the constructors' standings. One of them being moving into a new factory. I'm curious to see if that interrupts any flow of production. And
I hate
obviously they're still using Mercedes' wind tunnel for the time being, but the way that they have to structure their time in that wind tunnel is a lot different from what Mercedes obviously has to do because it's theirs and it's on site for them, where Aston Martin's a little bit different. They got to ship everything out there. And then the other part of it is actually, it's an interesting remark that Helmut Marko brought up. He believes that the impending reduction in CFD and wind tunnel time will hurt Aston Martin in the second half of the season. I understand because it gets reset at a certain point and everyone goes kind of back to zero, and I can kind of see that. But at the same time, I question, how has the sporting penalty hurt Red Bull? So for Helmut Marko to say that, I would like to understand how they were able to get the car that they've gotten, but not only that, is it going to affect the build-up to next season's car? Because they actually can use that allotted of time however they see fit. And I'll just be interested to see if, and I have a feeling we'll probably get that answer in the next few months, but I have a feeling that once we get to next season, I think these gaps are a lot closer than they are now, simply because of that sporting penalty. What do you guys think?
Maybe not the beginning of next season. I do think that we're seeing Ferrari and definitely Mercedes make up for some of the mistakes that they've made earlier in the regulation cycle, and we're going to see them continue to upgrade the car this year. But I said this last week that it's not necessary. Obviously, they'd like to get faster this season, but it's about not just improving their results this season, but building a base of knowledge for the 2024 car. And I think we'll start to see the fruits of that next year. And also, I think, there have been a lot of high-profile technical reshufflings. We've seen, Mercedes make a shuffle at the top. Ferrari's had a little bit of a shake-up. McLaren's bringing in David Sanchez and Rob Marshall, who just directed the Little Mermaid movie. They start work next year. And so once those guys get into the pipeline, I think we'll see definitely some design convergence, but also convergence in terms of performance. But I think that's something that'll happen probably within the first half of 2024, maybe not opening day, just because the lead time on this stuff is so huge.
There is a part of me that's a little bit worried for both Mercedes and Ferrari for next year, given that they're sort of simultaneously developing the 2024 car and trying to upgrade the 2023 car. And this is something that James Allison, I think, has been talking about this week, and that this is sort of an unusual predicament for Mercedes to be in, to be focusing and kind of splitting their resources on these two projects. And I know that, Ferrari's car for 2024 is reportedly already in the wind tunnel. And so that's why they're not trying to make too many massive upgrades on the 2023 version, since, that would sort of mess up their entire direction for both cars. But I wonder when that split in resources is going to bite those teams, and whether it will be at the start of 2024 or maybe it's in, some of their upgrade directions on the second half of the season, because I just don't think you can be split in two directions for this long and wind up with one cohesive solution.
Yeah, I mean, speaking with, Tom McCullough and the other guys down at Aston Martin during the Miami Grand Prix, it really sounded like they're going to be switching over to, their car relatively soon. I mean, looking at Ferrari, the introductions that they're bringing to the car for this weekend are huge. Like, they have a brand new floor. The side pods are brand new. I mean, they're really, from the images I've seen, the step that they're taking this weekend, that is a step more towards what Red Bull is doing rather than what their own concept was. And, Ferrari has really, struggled with quite a few things this season, and in particular, race pace. Like, this is going to be a massive step for Ferrari, and it's kind of like them conceding that their concept just isn't working. And looks like that philosophy will change this weekend. But then again, right, you brought up some great points, Meg, but how are they going to be able to split resources on developing not only the 2023 car, but also the 2024 car? I mean, if you look at what Mercedes did last weekend, it's a huge upgrade. And then you've got Lewis Hamilton, coming out and saying that, the upgrades weren't the improvement that, they had dreamed of, but he feels... But he feels like as this thing rolls along, more changes will come to this car this season, and the team can get closer to the front. I don't know. How do you guys look at this? Do you think that some of these teams can actually start clawing back performance this year? Because I believe it. Just basing it off of what I saw last season.
So just kind of reading through some of Fred Vassar's quotes from this week, it sort of seems like Ferrari's not done, but they're done with major upgrades. They're not going to do a full-fledged Mercedes thing, because he basically said at this point it wouldn't come through until October, and then it's rather useless to us. So I sort of respect him just coming out and saying that now and being like, this is sort of what we've got, and we're going to do our minor upgrades, and we're going to try to get better within the race. But at this point, we're going full bore ahead into 2024. And I think that at this point, that's something that they have to do. Like the race pace issue is, I think, a much greater issue than some side pods. Even though that's great for them right now, and hopefully will help them get past just being a qualifying only team. But I think that they just need to keep focusing ahead and trying to close that gap later rather than this year.
Baumann, what do you think, buddy?
This is one of the tougher decisions that team principals and technical directors have to make every year, and it's one that Red Bull for a while consistently got wrong. And I think it's interesting to view, because it's not about just making a faster car. It's about improving your car faster than Red Bull can. And no team has less incentive to continue developing this season than Red Bull, just because they're going to have less wind tunnel time to begin with. They've got the sporting penalties from the cost cap overrun, and they're so far ahead. I don't know why they would care about winning every race, but they're so far ahead. And if the other teams are already backing off and in a way conceding this title, then Red Bull needs to be out in front and focusing on 2024 and beyond. I will say, with relatively stable regulations, the two, developing for the second half of 23 and developing for 24 are not mutually exclusive goals. I think there's a lot of value, particularly for a team like Mercedes that struggled with correlation between wind tunnel and on-track performance, to get these new parts, to get this new concept on the track and actually use this second half of the season as a test bed. Lewis Hamilton being unsatisfied with the car, take that for what it's worth, because he's always unsatisfied with the car. But I think that there's, in a way, it's almost more imperative for the second group of teams to get on top of 24, because Red Bull will be so well incentivized to shift focus earlier than anybody else. And, that doesn't mean giving up on 23 entirely. You could still bring parts, but it's got to be with, like I've been saying, with an eye towards next season, not just salvaging one consolation win at the end of the season like Mercedes did last year.
Let's talk about Haas, because actually, let's talk about the engine manufacturers 2026, and we'll start with Haas, because on Sunday on this show we spoke about a report that came out that Alfa Romeo were set to join Haas in a title deal from 2024. Now, obviously, that's not an OEM, and there's no engine components involvement. It would strictly be mostly a branding exercise deal. Haas today, on Thursday, denied that there would been any talks about partnership, but would be open to a deal with Alfa Romeo in the future. And it brought up some other points where, I thought about, okay, well, we had the Aston Martin Honda announcement last week, but then again, as we get forward and we look at 2026, I mean, it sounds like a lot of these teams need this OEM and car designer relationship to come together, because you can't keep buying all of your components and then hoping that things are going to work out and you're going to be able to beat your competitors, where if you have things that are in-house, then that may be a better option for you. McLaren's Andreas Stella, I think he feels that, because they don't have a relationship with an OEM for 2026 at the moment, but I think, he feels that they won't need an engine partner for that season or that regulation, and it's not going to really impact what the team's progress is going to be within that championship, where, I don't know, as I start to see all of this start to happen and these teams are partnering up with all these OEMs and OEMs getting interested in getting involved in Formula One. I mean, Baumann, I think you and I discussed, I think it's got to go that way, doesn't it? It has to. That's
the way that the FIA and Formula One, the bigwigs up there, seem to want it to go.
Yeah.
As far as commercial incentives and competitive incentives, I don't think getting an Alfa Romeo sticker on your car, I mean, let's see what it's done for Sauber. I think Alfa Romeo's gotten, it's the best sponsorship deal in sports right now, because people think they're building an F1 car and they're not. And if they can roll that over and get in bed with Haas and do the same thing, then obviously that's something that Alfa Romeo should try to explore. But I don't think it's as important to get the branding as it is to get a works engine, and a good one. And this is something that's been the case, since the 70s and 80s. That you need to get even the most successful privateer teams, McLaren in the 80s and Williams and BAR when they were running well, they were in tight with a major engine manufacturer, and that's the important thing, And so whether that's, I guess the Red Bull Ford thing is a little bit different, but what makes me optimistic for Sauber / Audi in 2026 and beyond is not the Volkswagen branding. It's the fact that they're going to be building their engine in-house. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's convenient from a commercial perspective for F1 from their point of view to get these car brands in and associate. Maybe they get 9 or 10 teams for between these guys and the Andretti Cadillac thing, and however that shakes out. They could get every major manufacturer on the market competing in F1. I think that's I don't necessarily agree with that perspective, because we've seen how fickle these big brands have been, these corporate conglomerates, and the sport has been the more stable teams McLaren, Williams have been, these privately run teams that can pick up and drop, these engine manufacturers as they come. Red Bull now, I think, is a perfect example of this. They've been doing this for close to 20 years now. So, but just because I disagree with it doesn't mean that there's not logic to it, and that seems to be the overriding logic that the Formula One is using. So, I'm sort of lukewarm on this, but I absolutely see why Alfa Romeo would pursue it. I can understand why it would be attractive to Haas and why it would be attractive to F1 as an organization.
What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, Haas certainly wants money wherever they can get it, right? So, more power to them for getting that. I agree with what both of you said, though, in that I think if you want to be a truly competitive Formula One team in this day and age, you want that sort of a partnership where you can have control over what the engine looks like, what the components look like that go into it, how it connects into the car. I think, obviously if you are not one of those teams, you're sort of beholden to the Mercedes and Ferrari, et cetera, manufacturers who don't really have a whole lot of incentive to work super closely with you. But I also think that there are teams on the grid that are probably pretty happy with where they're at, Haas being one of them. And, I'm sure everyone would tell you that they want to be competitive and want to win everything. I don't think that that's very realistic for them at this point, and I don't know that that's like a truly end game goal of theirs. So they're probably perfectly happy with where they're at, and I think, more and more we may start to see that split between the teams that are going to sign these kinds of big flashy deals and really do want to go for it, and the ones that are content being a midfield team.
Yeah, and I think, like, Baumann, you make a good point, too. I think some of these teams do need to figure out how they can kind of sort of protect themselves from all of the OEMs who get involved in racing and then all of a sudden they get a change in management structure and then they want to leave certain types of racing. I mean, I've been involved in the sport since I was like 9 years old, so I've seen this happen a lot where engine manufacturers do get invested into a sport and then all of a sudden pull out, and then they decide to come back a few years later where they've left that team with no power unit or engine to run the car. And so I think that is a bit of a concern. I like what Red Bull's done with creating the Red Bull powertrain division. I think it's a really smart move. And yeah, that's the one thing I always think about too. So that was a good point that you brought up. Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso brought up a point about the Monaco Grand Prix, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, simply put, that it was easy for those sitting on the sofa watching the Monaco Grand Prix. That I think what we're getting at here is the fact that the race isn't that exciting, and simply put, we discussed it on the show last week. Where
this one was. I found it to be thrilling from my sofa.
I don't know. Like, Saturday's qualifying was awesome.
Incredible.
That was awesome. But like the race itself, I mean, it was okay. I wouldn't say it was awesome.
So here's what I push back about that. Like, there was obviously not a lot of overtaking, and I don't think there necessarily needs to be overtaking. I think there needs to be jeopardy, and the split strategies between Red Bull and Aston, and then the rain coming obviously threw everything into chaos. And when it's, I think that Bernie Ecclestone's thing about we should add sprinklers to every F1 track, like, I unironically agree with that.
Sold.
So, and we saw this on Sunday, but there needs to be something to pay attention to. And I think that there can be, we talked about cycling last week. I'm obviously a big baseball person as well. Those are two sports where not a lot happens, but it's the fun in watching them is living with the anxiety of wondering what will happen in the future. And I think F1, even when there's not a lot of overtaking, can be very similar. And I think that one of the big thing in terms of entertainment that I would try to adjust about the sport, it's not, the problem is not that Red Bull is so dominant. The problem is not that it's hard to pass with these cars. The problem is not necessarily that they're so big and they're not as nimble as they used to be and can't get around Monaco the way they used to. It's that everybody's running the same tire strategy. and there's no chance to pull a fast one when everybody's running medium to hard and working the tires basically the same way. And I don't want to crap on Pirelli who've been tasked with a very, very difficult job where everybody's going to be unhappy with some aspect of their performance. But Verstappen got out and pulled out pretty stable. It was like 8 or 9 seconds for most of the race gap before the rain came. But we were I was wondering, like, if their pit stop strategy diverges and we get Alonso coming back at him on faster tires toward the end of the race, could we get a battle for the end? Whether there's a surprise winner or even a decisive pass, like that keeps my interest in in an individual race. So I obviously last week was on here criticizing the Monaco Grand Prix as a racing spectacle. I think last week's race was pretty good. It was one of the better races of the season, which might be a comment on the quality of some of the other races this season. But I don't know. Monaco is just weird. It's a unique thing because we sort of understand that it's not going to be IndyCar. We understand it's about precision and the driving experience and the history, and it can be a parade, but that's just sort of the price you pay for revisiting this iconic venue. And everybody, I think as much as we all complain about that, everybody's made their peace with it. So I'm so far afield from the original question, but I sort of push back against Alonso's premise a little bit, I think.
Megan, did you get a chance to watch Monaco? I know you've been in transit, so I wasn't sure if you had a chance to actually sit down and go through it.
I watched most of it from my phone while I was getting ready for a wedding that I was in on Sunday. So I don't have all of the details, but I will say I think the piece that kept me most interested in this maybe speaks to your point a little bit, Baumann, was that threat of rain and sort of the question of, was it going to come? There was like the 30% chance. And then on the broadcast, they were like, oh, it's not going to rain. It's going to be fine. And then it did. And kind of watching, Alonso get his pit stop strategy wrong with that. And just that looming threat, I think, ended up being the most interesting part for me. So I will say I maybe that speaks more to the intrigue for me of Monaco then, that like without weather, I think I would have found it very, very boring. So if there is a way for us to get that sort of Buffalo Wild Wings like button where you can click it and change it like in those commercials and just like maybe like 5 times a year we get that at a race, that would be pretty great, whether it's sprinklers or maybe some sort of Mario Kart like banana peel on the track. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the weather was the most interesting part for me.
I saw tweets saying Nicholas Latifi was the human version of the B-dubs button you were talking about.
Can we just get him back? Like which team can we collectively pool our money together to pay to sign him? Because like 6 times a year he was guaranteed to do something wild that just threw everything out of whack.
This is your 11th team that F1 should run like a league-owned team and have Latifi and Yuki Tsunoda in those 2 cars just like the Joker team.
We'll let Michael Andretti on the grid as long as he hires Nicholas Latifi.
As long as it's a bit, yeah.
As long as it's a bit, yes.
Spanish Grand Prix. So we'll see how this one shakes out with the old configuration coming back into the fold here. Last time they ran on it, I believe, was 2006, and then from 2007 onward, it was this slow sort of Mickey Mouse configuration where they were trying to encourage passing, but it never really happened. So I've raced on both configurations, and very much prefer. Hey, gotta do it. Very much prefer this configuration they're going to be running this weekend. I'm going to be very interested to see who could take the final turn flat out, because I think that's going to be a challenge. Which is, for me, I love it. It's going to be great. I think this race is going to be pretty good too. Now, whether or not it's going to be like awesome, like Monaco, as Michael Baumann puts it, I don't know. It may not be, but I think with this DRS zone and the way that the track layout is, I think we're probably going to get way more passing than we've seen so far this season. Now, whether or not it's going to lead to an incredible race, who knows? Upgrades for this weekend, we've already mentioned a few with Red Bull and Ferrari. AlphaTauri's got a new floor coming in this weekend. I don't want to slam on Nick de Vries, but do you think that...
Yeah, you do.
Well,
You wouldn't keep doing it if you didn't want to do it. This is your podcast.
Well, here's the thing. I don't really like to slam drivers, and nor do I think Nick de Vries is a bad driver. I think he's a very good driver. I think with a new floor for this weekend, what I was going to say is I think this helps, and I think we get Nick going in the right direction here. He had his Monaco Grand Prix was pretty decent, if I remember correctly. Like he didn't have a terrible race, which was good for him. And I think that seeing in the direction that he could go with the new floor, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. Daniel Ricciardo. Megan, you brought this up before we came on. It's actually pretty interesting. Apparently, he's selling his 720 Spider?
He is selling his 720S Spider McLaren that he drove throughout the 2022 season. Shout out, where did I see this news? PlanetF1.com for bringing this to my attention. It's very, very thrilling. I love any and all Daniel Ricciardo drama, so there's been a big hole in my heart for most of this year, but this is really helping me out. So he's selling it for a reported £217,000. It has not quite 7,000 miles on it. And apparently it goes from 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. This is all the information that I can give you guys on this car. But yes,
only one
this
owner,
is the one that he
old
drove.
lady, you only drove it to church.
Only drove it to church. Only drove it after he, had some success on track. Actually, no, that was 2021, wasn't it? So no, he only drove it last season. So maybe that's where all his bad luck came from. All of it can be traced to this one car, but yeah, he's selling it now, which is a very interesting timing. I'm like, I don't know if this is trying to, signal his continued breakup with them or any sort of lingering bitterness, but
that's what I thought it was. That's definitely this is definitely getting rid of the furniture you bought with your ex-girlfriend.
Yes. So in that way, I'm kind of surprised he waited this long, but maybe he thought this was when he could get the best price for it.
Have you guys heard some of the comments that Red Bull is kind of keeps sort of saying over the past few races where
yes.
Daniel showed up super thin? What did you do to him while he was at McLaren? We put some meat on his bones.
They make him sound like he's haunted. Right? He showed up and was a completely different person, and they're like, he's finding his way back to himself now that he's back with us.
Yeah.
It's pretty dark. They make him sound like he just lost it for 2 years.
Yeah,
I'll be honest, having seen the back half of last season, I think that's a pretty reasonable conclusion to draw, that he was haunted.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I think one of the things about Ricciardo that I've noticed for the past quite a few years is that he always has good relationships with the teams, and he never badmouths the team, and he never gets into it with the team, and he always tries to keep that reputation of himself with other teams very professional. And that's one of the things that I've known about Daniel Ricciardo for so long. And that's why, when you brought this up about him selling the McLaren, the 720 Spider, I thought that was really strange. He must be moving or something and just needs to offload it or something like that. But I don't know. If we put all of our money together, do you think we can buy it?
I don't know. Do you have $216,000, Tim?
I was going to say, not unless you guys have a lot of money lying around, because I certainly
How about the Steve Dangle Podcast Network is on the come. Is there spare $200,000 in the budget?
I can talk to CEO Adam Wilde, Jesse Blake, and Steve Dangle to see if they've got some spare cash lying around, if they want to invest it in Daniel Ricciardo's McLaren, and then maybe we can have it as a show car when people come into the studio. We just have it there because they've got a new big studio now that we built here in Toronto. It's actually really cool. But yeah, no, that'd be all right.
I
Guys,
think
thanks
road
very much.
trip, web series. We do Canada, drive down to Austin. Drive
there you
down to
go.
Mexico City, and just do all the North American Grand Prix in Daniel Ricciardo's McLaren.
I'm in.
Could
Let's do
double his mileage very quickly. There's not very much on there.
Guys, thanks very much for doing this. This has been a lot of fun. Megan, let everybody know where they can find you and what you got going on.
Yeah, you can find me many weeks on the Ringer F1 show. Otherwise, you can find me on theringer.com writing about succession, golf, all sorts of things. And you can find me on Twitter at Meg Schuster.
Baumann, same thing. Let everybody know what you got going on.
Twitter at Michael Baumann, fangraphs.com. Please consider becoming a member. We're going to have some exciting MLB draft stuff in the works that we're doing some prep on right now. So be on the lookout for that at the end of June, early July.
Did you guys watch the final? I know, Megan, you probably saw the final episode of Succession. You didn't?
I didn't yet. I was traveling.
What?
I was traveling, so don't spoil it for me.
Oh no.
You can work at the Ringer without. Wait, hang on.
Yeah.
The only reason I watched Succession in the first place was because, I didn't think you were allowed to work at the Ringer without being up to date on it.
Yeah. The only reason I was like, hold on a second. The only reason I was like really started to dive in was because of, I think it was Baumann. It was your article on the baseball hats.
I think I'm very close to getting fired, you guys. I won't lie. I'm at least 2 weeks behind because I was out of town. So
oh my god, they didn't set aside time when you were in Stockholm to.
No, but we did ask multiple Spotify executives which Succession character they identified with. So critical analysis from us. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Well, guys, thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. If you want more from me, you can get me on social media at Tim Hauraney. Please head on over to Spotify. Give Nailing the Apex 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with Apple Podcasts. Write a review. It helps us grow the show a lot, and we'll talk to you all later in the week.